Hey everybody, Mr. Wagstaff here for the dramatic conclusion of this unit here on the religion and the growth of the Middle Ages. So the Middle Ages in world history has a very dramatic conclusion. It's called the Bubonic Plague. It kills 1/3 of the world's population and is a fundamental change in human history. Because nobody had really questioned anything because education wasn't important. So for 1,000 years in the Middle Ages, nothing changed. Everybody focused very heavily on religion. That was kind of your authority center as far as what kept order in society. That's what you trusted in. If you had a question, it was answered with religion. And that's just how it was. When all of a sudden there becomes a disease that indiscriminately just kills people, and this is nothing like the coronavirus, all right? This is absolutely devastating. It doesn't cater to one group of people over the other, whether you're old, whether you're young. Everybody's equal opportunity to get it, and if you get it, you're probably going to die. And you're not going to have a nice, easy way out. These huge festering boils come. It's as horrific as a disease as you can imagine. All right. Not only that, it kills religious people. It kills the good guys and the bad guys and royalty, the nobles, the serfs. It kills everybody the same. After the bubonic plague ends, and that's kind of the crazy part we'll talk about here, it just stops killing people. Everybody's like, what happened? Why did this happen? After the plague ends, all right, and it stops killing people, 1/3 of the world's population dies. In England, 60% of the population dies. The majority of people in the entire country of England died from the bubonic plague. Once it just stops killing people, nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows why it was killing people. Nobody knew why it stopped killing people. Once it stops, it's at like a reset on the world's mentality. And they're like, wait a minute. We got to start figuring stuff out, try to prevent this from happening again. All of a sudden, you're going to see after the bubonic plague, all right, and we're going to talk about the plague today, of what we know about it, how it happened. You're going to see people really focus on education more, that there's a new way of looking at things, because the way we'd been doing it for 1,000 years sure didn't stop us from all getting killed. Maybe there's a better way of doing things. So the bubonic plague is very much the ending point of the Middle Ages, as we're going to start moving into stuff like the Enlightenment and the Renaissance, and a bigger focus on education after the bubonic plague that we'll move into in future units. All right, so today we're going to talk about the plague. All right, let me get myself a little smaller here. Boop. And put myself up here in the corner. All right. Nobody puts baby in the corner. Y'all are too young to get that joke. That's a Dirty Dancing reference. Your parents might find it humorous. Whatever. All right. So, the plague. In 1374, a group of sailors got sick on a journey from one city to the next. The date is kind of hard to pin down. It's called the bubonic plague. It is nicknamed the Black Death. Let me show. I have a map here somewhere. All right, here we go. I got a map here trying to explain it to you. Now, this is like a whole bunch of stuff and a whole bunch of scribbles. Let me explain to you what's going to happen or what happens here. So, it's going to originate, people assume, because the first cases are going to take place in China. So this over here is China. I say this over here. Let me do it with more than a pointer. So this here is China. All right. That is where the original cases took place at, down in this area here. Now, yes, there are cases there. Yes, there are people that died from it. It may not. It was awful everywhere. Europe is where it's going to be devastating. All right, so stay with me. When the cases started over here, all right, they're eventually going to spread across the world. Now, they spread crazy quick. And this surprised everybody at the time. Nobody had thought about this. Why do you think that this disease spread so quickly across the world? It's because of the trade routes. All right. So the Middle East had already had, this is the Middle East in here, all right, in this area. Make them big squirrely too big. The Middle East is here, all right. The Middle East, the middle of the map, had already had trade set up here with China, all right, with stuff like the Silk Road. The Silk Road is a path that people use to travel to meet with China so they can get silk and stuff. So you have people constantly going back and forth, people that could be infected with these diseases, all right? So what would happen is this disease would come across the land routes, all right, from people that were trading. Remember, after the Crusades here, trade had drastically opened up with Europe here to the Middle East. So once it makes it to the Middle East, then the disease is going to make it from the Middle East with the new trade routes over into Europe. What we've learned, all right, and this is how we're able to figure out kind of where it comes from, that the biggest outbreaks took place on cities that were near the water. So while it does travel across land, all right, but these cities here, like Florence, well, basically where all the little skulls are, those are the main ones. So like Budapest, not necessarily right here on the ocean, but you can see through the Black Sea, these water routes, that cities that did a lot of their trading on the water routes actually got hit harder than the ones that were doing a lot of their trading across land. There's a couple reasons for that, all right? Here's the big one of how it spread. Nobody knew. We learned later on how it was spread, and we'll get to that in a minute. But it is being spread in the population centers. People have the plague, all right? And they come over and then they spread it into other cities when they're trading. So a lot of the questions here are, it's like, why is it able to spread across countries and oceans and continents so quickly? Along trade routes. Now, the reason Europe got absolutely devastated by this more than China does, more than the Middle East does, they all get it as well. But it's not nearly as bad as it is in Europe. I mean, just decimate. Again, in England, 60% of the population dies from this in Europe. Or in England, Europe as well, just entire towns just die. Is because of, in Europe, they lived in cities. They didn't live in the countryside in Europe. They lived in these packed in cities. And when people get sick in cities, it spreads really quickly. We've seen this with the coronavirus in the big cities. New York City was one of the first ones that had it spread like crazy, whereas the more country areas, like in the mountains of North Carolina, as of when this is being recorded, has not nearly reached the mountains of North Carolina and these other very rural states in the United States the way it does in really close-knit cities. It's the same way any disease spreads. So in Europe, it just spread like wildfire because everybody was packed in there together, made it so much worse in Europe than other places. So the question was, how does the disease able to spread across countries and oceans and continents so quickly? We talked about that pretty in depth. Here's why. Look, I got myself over there. There's a rat. Rats are the ones that are spreading it. We learned this much later. This is why the ports that are all ports are on the ocean, that the trading routes that are on the ocean in port cities are hit harder is because rats come over on ships. On land routes, they'll stay in wagons and stuff too. Rats were everywhere. They still are every day, but we keep them out of our houses and stuff pretty effectively now. Back in the Middle Ages, that just wasn't a possibility. You weren't going to like keep rats out of your house. So it's kind of like seeing the squirrels in the trees. Like you see them, you don't really bother you. Like they do their own thing. They'll find out later, based on the data of who's getting hit, that the rats were the carriers of it. So what's interesting is the rats had the bubonic plague, but unless the rat comes and bites you, right, you're not going to get it from the rat. So people didn't make that correlation at the time to stay away from rats. It's not until much later they realized that the rats were the problem. So rats have fleas on them, little bugs that bite the rat, and the fleas then get the bubonic plague, and then they go bite a human, and the human's not even aware of it, and that's how it was transferred. It was the fleas from the rats that were transferring it, and people were just panicking. I mean, people were praying to every god that they could think of, coming up with new religions. There was all of a sudden more religious hostility. People were going to, Christians were going to kill Jewish people because it was their fault. Like, everybody was in such a panic. I mean, just look at the toilet paper shortage with the coronavirus. All right. People don't always act logically in a pandemic. And it was violent and awful stuff was happening during the bubonic plague. But the rats were the carriers of it and the ones that were giving it away. All right. So, years later, scientists are going to figure out that it was rats. What had caused it? It's going to be the fleas off of the rats. There's nothing you can do. Now, so number 31 here. What was the cause of the Black Death? Why did no one think of a scientific way of preventing its spread? Sorry, excuse me. So the cause of the Black Death was, and what I'm really asking here is what was spreading it? It's the rats or the fleas off the rats. And then why was no one thinking of a scientific way of preventing its spread? The reason that knowledge wasn't valued at the time. People weren't expecting to, know things or understand how to prevent it. It was like, so people would go isolate themselves, and I'm not getting it. And they would still get it because, again, fleas off the rats. They're isolating themselves, but they're not realizing there's a rat scurrying across the floor. Like, you just don't even think about it back then because they were everywhere. So there was no scientific knowledge because of the ignorance of the population. They had no defenses. There was no medical anything that could actually prevent you from getting it. And if you got it, the medical treatment was basically useless. You just had a huge, nasty boil. Your body just rotted. And then you died a horrible, painful death. And it's just an absolutely horrific way to go. Because of the horrificness, though, when the great death, the Black Death, is over, you're really going to see humans on Earth start trying to better ourselves because we're like, the way we've been doing it for 1,000 years in the Middle Ages obviously isn't working because we still got a disease that basically wiped everybody out. So, describe dying from the plague. This is an awful picture of fingers that have the plague. It's swelling, black bruises on skin, heavy sweats, convulsive coughing, horrible body odor, spitting blood, and finally an agonizing death. I don't want to look at this picture. Looking at pictures online of like the Black Death, it's awful. It's just absolutely horrific of what people went through that suffered through the Black Death. What's one of the craziest things? So 75 million people died. All right, that's a third of all humans that exist on Earth. But again, in Europe, the percentages were much higher because they lived in cities in these urban areas, and it was absolutely just catastrophic when you're all on top of each other and you can't get away from these rats, which is what is spreading it. So one of the craziest things, and this is really weird. So nobody knows where it came from. Like, yeah, it started in China, but they don't have where did it start at? Like, why did this just pop up? Nobody knows. To this day, they don't know. All of a sudden, one day, it just stops killing people. Nobody figured anything out. Nobody effectively quarantined. Like, it just stopped. There's no vaccine that came out. They have no way of fighting. It just stopped killing people. So, every year people still die of the bubonic plague present day. I think last time I looked it up, it was like 2012, and like 4 or 5 people around the world had died of the bubonic plague. Why? I don't know. Why does it not spread like it did 1,000 years ago? I don't know. There's no rhyme or reason to it. This is a big, and you still see today. When the coronavirus comes out, the focus on trying to come up with a vaccine and how to prevent it, still we've been dealing with this for thousands of years, ever since, as you saw in mankind videos. Once people start farming, disease is just very common. We still battle that as a human society of how to prevent the spread of diseases. But while there is no answer on why the bubonic plague stopped killing people, what we know is it did stop killing people. And then, in the ruins that are left of human civilization, there starts to be a slow look at everybody and like, hey, maybe we should go back to school and start learning things and figure out why this happened. Because prior to this, it was, hey, let's focus on God. God will prevent all the bad stuff from happening. No amount of praying stopped this from happening in the Middle Ages. It didn't matter whether you were nobility, if you were a serf, man, woman, whatever race you were, whether you were the highest official. So many people started dying in these cities, like the Pope would show up. All right. The Pope, to my knowledge, never got the plague. He not everybody did, but he did not. So he showed up, and everybody had to have a funeral. Otherwise you don't go to heaven. That's kind of a thing in the Christian church at the time. You had to have a funeral or you don't go to heaven. Well, so many people were dying. I mean, whole cities were dead. So what does the Pope do? He's like, I bless this river. Throw all the bodies in the river, let them float down. When people saw that the Pope was just having bodies thrown into a river and just, you're all blessed, like, it really made everybody realize the Pope has no control over this. And when people lost faith in the Pope, as far as any type of divine ability, any godlike ability, it's really going to change life after the Black Death, when they realize, wait a minute, maybe we have to take care of ourselves, meaning humans have to figure out a way to help ourselves, and just relying solely on religion is not the best thing of doing. And the Black Death is going to fundamentally pull society out of the Dark Ages, because things have to be done different once this is over. So 32, what stopped the Black Death? We talked about it. Who knows? And then how did people's view of the world change after the bubonic plague? And we just got done talking about that. All right, so a little shorter here, but we are done with this unit as far as the lessons.